So there's a little souvenir of the symbol of the Delaware. See you in that word. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Larry, I didn't know that was.
See you right next week.
Yeah. Hey.
Well, my name's Randy Bushart.
Do some.
Actually from the Albany, New York area, but I had a summer camp in Calhoun, New York, that I've been coming to since I was probably about 13 years old. So I got a lot of good memories and ties to the area here. I'm also the Calhoun Depot historian, so we're trying to, a lot of you are aware that we're trying to turn that into a visitor center for the area. So what I'm going to cover here is focused a lot about Calhoun, but really gives you the history from the start up to today of the area. So there's a lot to cover. I'll kind of zip along here, and bit tough to read. Say, Chase, can you make that full screen? Or?
This is the
best. Okay, well, starting out in 1832, the New York and Erie Railroad was chartered by New York State, and it was to build a railroad from near New York City on the Hudson River to Lake Erie, and they went towards Dunkirk. So hence the name New York and Erie Railroad, or the Erie Railroad, as we a lot of people know it. And one of the gentlemen that was kind of the spark of the whole thing was the actual chief engineer of the Delaware and Hudson Canal. It was Benjamin Wright, and he was taxed at the time because the canal was already built. They started looking west to actually build a canal west from Lackawaxen up the Delaware River and eventually go to Lake Erie. And he made it as far as the Alleghenies, and he said that we can't build a canal, but a railroad might be possible. And that was really the spark of the whole thing. So they had the charter in 1832, broke ground in 1835 in deposit, and started construction. And one of the reasons they had to start from Piermont, New York, not New York City, is because their charter said they could not build outside of New York State. From New York State put that in there, so they had to stay in New York State. So there was a couple obstacles to that. Once they started surveying, they found that some of the better route for a railroad to build was along the Delaware, but from Port Jervis up to Lackawaxen, the Delaware and Hudson Canal had the better side on New York, and it was almost sheer cliffs on the Pennsylvania side. So they looked at some options. This is a 1847 survey that I have in my collection, but they looked at two interior routes to stay inside of New York. So they actually looked at building the railroad from not coming into Port Jervis, but up through Wurtsboro, over to Monticello, coming down Calhoun Creek into Calhoun to stay in New York, and then up the Delaware River. That would be, better for business because there's farms that would ship there. It was very remote going up the Delaware River between Lackawaxen and Port Jervis up to Calhoun, hardly anything there. But when they crunched all the numbers and they did a lot of formulas, that it was just a lot better business decision to build up through the Delaware River. So, when you think about it, the railroad may have never even come through Narrowsburg and Coshocton at one time if they took that interior route, but they decided on the one that they have today. So this is a little bit hard to see, but the New York and Erie Railroad, they put out a little ad for contractors. And it was right in the, there's a little lag there. Okay. It was right in the paper that they put it out. This is from 1835 paper. These are online now, which really makes it nice, but this is for the contractors to build up there. They had stipulations that I highlighted in there that the contractors must agree in the contract that they would not use ardent spirits with the workers. It means they couldn't drink strong alcohol, you know, because that was even a problem back then. There was an article in 1926, Calhoun Democrat newspaper, where they interviewed Mrs. Curtis, Charles Curtis, that was actually on scene when the first train that came all the way through from when they built the entire railroad from Piermont up to Dunkirk in May of 1851. She was there, and so she recounted her story, which was pretty interesting. She said that it was May, so they gathered flowers and to greet the first locomotive, and it was quite a production. It was a big excursion, 2 trains worth. They went one day up to Elmira and the next day up to Dunkirk. And when it came through, they were a little bit concerned. It said in here, it said that crowd of children there, they were going to throw flowers, and there was a real concern that maybe it would derail the locomotive, you know. So I mean, it was such a new technology, you know, people really didn't know much about it. So, you know, that was right in the newspaper. The local residents were not always that welcoming to the railroad. I mean, the steam engines scared horses. There was grade crossing accidents. When I did a lot of research, there was really a lot of lawsuits against the railroad. I mean, you know, they hit farmers' cattle, you know. So, you know, in fact, there was a little spoof. Here's a clip from the Calhoun local record newspaper in 1868. Said that a little jab to the railroad saying it's proposed to take down the signboards that say look out from the engine on the Erie Railroad and substitute them saying prepare to meet your God. So, you know, it wasn't always easy for the railroad at first. If you boarded a train in 1851, you might, for 50 cents, buy one of these Harper's guides. This was an original one that I have in my collection. Very nice scenes, of course, photography not around at the time, but they did these nice graphics in there showing the Delaware River Valley, little descriptions of the town along the way so you could follow as you're riding the train. This is a copy. There's the originals right up here. It's a timetable from 1855. So the railroad was just open a few years at the time. This is an employee timetable. So that's how train crews operated. And back then is on timetable authority. They just had their timetable, their watch, and they knew when to run the train. A couple of things of interest, like on the westward trains, of course, you had some first class trains, which are usually passenger trains. You had a mail train, a night express, but you also had a westbound only immigrant train. So it was just a train just dedicated, you know, they sold a little bit lower price tickets on an immigrant train. And then, you know, so when you think about it, that's how a lot of Europeans came into New York. They would board these immigrant trains, drop them off along the Erie Railroad, develop some of these towns with population. Also, there's special instructions for trains approaching stations and wooding places. Wood was the first source of fuel for the steam locomotives, later coal. So you needed water and you needed wood, which the Delaware Valley was very plentiful for. They actually even had wood agents assigned to the railroad that would go out and contract with local farmers for cords and cords of wood to supply for the steam locomotives. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln traveled through here on the New York and Erie Railroad. He was a young lawyer at the time, only about a year before he got elected president. And he was going to a conference in Norwich, Connecticut to speak. And he used the New York and Erie Railroad to come through here and attend that conference. These are some of the things that people would ship on the railroad. This is a very early poster from 1853 that so as soon as the railroad got open through here, you could get fresh oysters delivered to any of the stations on the New York and Erie. There was first and second class items that you could ship: cigars, china, coffee, barrels of beer, rifle for shotguns, and So, you know, the passenger business was good for the railroad, but there was a lot of profit in the freight business also. This is what a view of the locomotives looked like. This is a photo of a broad gauge 6-foot New York and Erie locomotive near Port Jervis at the time. But there was a gentleman that made some color drawings back in 1875 of the actual locomotives of what they look like, and did detailed drawings. Here is a Delaware Division Erie Railroad color drawing of what that locomotive looked like. So you can see how majestic and beautiful these things were kept. The locomotives at the time were actually assigned to that locomotive engineer. So he would get that locomotive every day, and he put a lot of personal touches on it. So you can see really how nice they must have looked coming down through the valley here. In 1861, the New York and Erie Railroad changed its name to Erie Railway. That was done usually because they were in trouble financially and they would reorganize. I will not get into it here, but the Erie Railroad was really struggling when they built it, and quite a few years into it. They went bankrupt a few times. I mean, and sometimes they were down to next to nothing even when they were constructing it. So they changed their name to Erie Railway. And these are a couple stereo views of Callicoon. Stereo gave you kind of a 3D viewer that you would use, and they put things out along the line. This is actually looking, if you're familiar with Callicoon, this would be where Agway is, where the Delaware Youth Center is, Callicoon Creek flowing out. So these are from pretty much 1870 type views of right behind Agway up and down the Erie. In 1878, the name changed again. It became the New York, Lake Erie, and Western Railroad. They expanded. They bought some railroads through Pennsylvania, Ohio, and into Illinois, and they reached Chicago. It was also done because they had some financial issues, but it became the New York, Lake Erie, and Western, so way beyond Lake Erie out to Chicago. In Callicoon, this was the original depot for the New York, Lake Erie, and Western. Here's a very rare, I've only found one of them, train at the station. Here's the original station, and it was to the east of the crossing. There's the Western Hotel. That church, I believe, still there, and this is the original station. That burned on November 5th, 1895, in the track inspector's office at about 11 p.m. The stove caught the building on fire, and that building fire would have spread to the rest of the town, but that happened to be the first Tuesday of November. And the townspeople were up because they were waiting for the election results to come in, because there was a big election. So they just happened to be around to help fight that fire and stop it from spreading, even though it destroyed that depot. So they worked out of a boxcar for a while, and then Erie came and they got some contractors. And in 1895, the name change began to Erie Railroad. This time it stayed until 1960 under that name, Erie Railroad. And they built a very nice depot that stands today, that was opened up in December of 1896, the week leading into Christmas. It opened up. So, you know, very beautiful station compared to a lot of them along the line. That station almost burned in 1913. The agent left the station for supper time. A little gas lamp mantle caught some papers on his desk on fire, and it just happened to be a passing train came by, saw the fire, the brakeman bailed off, rang the fire alarm, which the fire department at the time was right across the street from the depot, and alerted them, and they were able to save the depot. So this one did not burn. It's by chance. The Erie Railroad had their own police force. Here's a couple examples of their, these are Erie Railroad marked handcuffs and a police badge. Couple articles that I found interesting. There was chicken thieves in Callicoon that they caught up here. There was burglars in Wilkes-Barre where they blew up a safe in a Erie Railroad station only to get $8 out of it. But the railroads still today have their police forces. Here's a little knickknack that I picked up, but it was made in Austria for Charles Stark, who had a little shop in Calhoun, and shows the depot and Main Street. It's about as big enough to sort of put toothpicks in. A little souvenir that featured the depot. In the 1920s, the Erie Railroad always put out timetables, but they started putting scenes, and there's a lot of them along the Delaware River, but this one in May of 1928 featured the Calhoun Depot on the front. Here's that same photo here. You can see quite a bit of platform in here, an inter-track fence, so people won't try racing across the tracks to their train right before it enters the station. And the Erie Railroad promoted the Delaware River Valley. They called it Summerland, and they would put out these nice little pamphlets each year. Here's some from the 1930s and the 1940s. They even put out a little pamphlet about canoeing on the Delaware, would tell you where the rapids were. There was a rate where you could load your canoe onto the baggage car and bring it upriver, you know, from wherever you're at and come back down, you know, where to camp. It was very interesting. So they sold this area quite a bit to the tourists for the passenger business. Inside their pamphlet, you would find a nice colored map. You know, here's the Upper Delaware River featured on it, you know, places to go. Each town in here would be featured with places to stay. When this is just the Calhoun listing that I looked up, there were 68 places that you could write to and stay. Some were big, like the Olympia Western hotels, but a lot of them were just small farmhouses, you know, and it would just, you know, give you an address, you know, you'd write to them about, you know, what week you wanted to stay at the farmhouse and, you know, go there. So when you think it was almost like a, you know, back in the day type Airbnb type situation, so that you have today. Here's just a series of postcards showing you know, what the depot looked like in the time. You can see that all the people that would come off the train, you know, into town. Couple more postcards here. We're kind of standing up on the Calhoun Creek Bridge. There's the seminary, a train coming this way. Here's the original bridge that's gone today, but the piers are still there. Across Calhoun Creek, of course, the road bridge is there now. Couple other views here, little things that have changed. There was an old stone water tower. I have another photo that they tore down. They built another wood and concrete one that the base still exists behind the Olympia Hotel back there. A couple other views. You can see how big this was. There's the Western Hotel. That's the old stone water tower that it really stood out down in town. That, you know, they ended up demolishing and building the new one. I put KC here because each town along the railroad had a telegraph call, a 2 alpha code that applied to that town. So when they wrote, you know, when they telegraphed that station, they telegraphed the letters KC over the lines. All the stations would hear it. The operator in Calhoun would know it was his. That's how he communicated to the dispatcher to get train orders and instructions for the trains going back and forth. So, and that was all over the Erie. He had these 2-letter telegraph codes. This is a just a map that was made for leasing property. Sorry, the lag on there. And it was made back in the 40s, but this is of Calhoun. So here's the station, here's the main tracks. This track is no longer there that ran to the station. But the interesting thing is that when the railroads came to town, they were given big property, wide property lines. And when you see here's Lower Main Street and Upper Main Street, but here's the railroad right away that encompassed both those streets. So they had right up to the sidewalks. You know, they owned the property where the road was at one time because that's how much property they had in town. Here's a ticket from the Delaware and Susquehanna branches. Sorry. This
Yeah.
This ticket was around 1900. It'll list all the Delaware Division towns in here. You see small ones like Parker's Glen. You see Mass Pope in here, Stockport, a lot of places that somewhat disappeared from being station stops. Here's a little before and now scene. So, you know, some things have changed, but a lot have remained the same. You can see back in the, you know, around the turn of the century, very early automobiles, wagons here waiting for, you know, horse-drawn wagons waiting for the train to come in, Western Hotel here, and really a scene today. And, you know, the depot has really changed very little. Once again, a couple freight train views. Here, the photographer stand pretty much where Agway is in Callicoon. This train's, you know, just throttling out. This is a passenger train, but it had 9 mail and express cars on the head end that would, you know, bring in items towards New York City there, towards Narrowsburg, and away freight just leaving Callicoon here. That's Callicoon in the back. Here's a little postcard that they would mail. It says Erie Railroad from the agent in Callicoon. So if you're a consumer and you wanted to buy a table, this is for a table here, you know, you could go into a catalog like the Montgomery Wards or Sears catalog and order it. It would get shipped down to the depot by rail. You get one of these postcards in the mail. It says, come get your thing. And, you know, here's the $1.27 rate that you would pay on it and, you know, pick up your item. So that's kind of how that worked.
Is the floor?
And we do the same thing with Amazon. There was a lot of things that were shipped by rail that were local. Bluestone, a lot of fruits and vegetables, chickens that went out, you know, just a lot of items. One of the things though was big was the dairy and butter. A lot of towns had creameries along the way. Here, these are glass plate negatives, which I ended up printing that I got. This is the creamery in Callicoon, which is really just across from the Agway, across the tracks. Some of the remnants of this building are still back kind of in the woods there. Here's that creamery right there. There's where the apple barn still stands, to give you some reference. Here's a milk can that I got that's actually marked Callicoon and Erie on them. They're sort of color coded. So you put those on the train. On the opposite side, it says Fairview Farm, which was a farm in Callicoon. Bring it down. They ship it in. Of course, they know by the colors, and it said Erie to put it back on an Erie train to get back up to Callicoon empty. So that's how they cycled that out. The Erie Railroad used the Delaware River for a lot of publicity shots. Here's a, you know, steam a westbound train, believed to be around Hankins, and here a diesel view as they're transitioning from diesel, from steam to diesel back in around, I think the last steam left the Erie around 1952 as they started closing down the facilities. They also used it in a lot of artwork and ads. This is the back and front cover of the annual report to stockholders for the Erie Railroad, and they featured a nice painting done. This is down right around Basket. In the background is the bridge that goes over Basket Creek, which is Route 97. Nice train, probably like the Erie Limited, heading towards Callicoon in a few more miles for a stop. That same view graced the cover of the Erie Railroad Employees magazine for over 60 years. Monthly, they would put out an employee magazine. Great reference for a lot of information in there. Almost the same location. You can see the bridge for Basket Creek between Long Eddy and Hankins there. And even in 1952, they're still operating, you know, still referencing Summerland with all the special rates up and down the Delaware River towns here that you could buy tickets to. That magazine in 1950 ended up featuring a local resident in Calhoun. The story really was interesting because he was a World War II veteran that was involved in a Pacific ship sinking. And he survived. It's a very harrowing tale where a lot of his shipmates were actually in the water, shark attacks, and he was one of the few survivors. He went on to work for the Erie Railroad, and they featured him in this article here. Here he is at Calhoun Depot, and he actually, surprisingly, in a railroad company magazine, they featured his side jobs. And one of them, he had this nursery and gas station. And this is actually where Club 97, if you remember that restaurant out there out of Calhoun, that same building.
Did he put down with the Juno?
Yes,
Okay.
Yeah.
with the Sullivan brothers, the
Yeah.
Sullivan boys.
Yeah.
My uncle went down with that ship. He was from George Jervis. He went down with his whole.
Hines or something like that.
Yeah, yep, Hines, yep, that was his name.
Yes, that's
Yep.
right. He was one of the 8 survivors, I think.
Yeah.
Yep, but
Unbelievable.
very, very interesting article, very tied to the area. The Calhoun Depot escaped another one. They had a big wreck pile up there back in 1958. Here's where the depot was. The derailed car went right by the depot and then piled it up right in town here on a Sunday.
It's amazing it didn't take buildings down when it went through there. It just
Yeah.
missed the depot too.
It did just miss the depot, so another escape for the current depot. In 1960, the railroads were in bad shape there. They financially, they looked to merge. They merged with the Lackawanna Railroad and the Erie, so it became the Erie Lackawanna Railroad. Here's a view of the official train coming through Calhoun. These you might find interesting. A gentleman took these out the back end of a passenger train passing right through here back in 1965. So he's riding train 21 towards Binghamton. This is the Coshocton Lake Huntington station where Coshocton Mills is. Of course, this depot was relocated and saved, thankfully. He stopped, he took a picture of leaving Calhoun. So they have a nice little waiting shelter here. You can see a dairy truck, the original Calhoun Theater.
Yeah.
In the background, this is Hankins, so this depot did not survive, was demolished.
I think they would,
Now you took one, lastly there of Hancock. This is getting towards the end of passenger service in Calhoun. There was only one coach here, not enough room. The railroads were doing this on purpose. They were trying to get out of the passenger business. They lost the mail contracts from the government, which made passenger trains very unprofitable. So they couldn't just drop it without government approving it. So they just squeezed people out, made it disgruntled, made bad times for them to
what year?
travel. That was in 1966. These are the actual last trains, or this is the last train through Calhoun. Last westbound was in November, just after Thanksgiving, 1966, and last eastbound just a day after that. So, and then that was the rest of end of passenger service. The Calhoun Depot survived here as a maintenance building for the railroad. So signalmen and trackmen worked out it for many years. In 1976, Erie Lackawanna went away, became part of Conrail. So here's a couple early pictures I took back in the 1980s of some Conrail trains there coming in. And then the one thing that happened is Conrail started trying to save money so they could tear down a building in New York State. They got out of paying taxes and they started demolishing the depots around this area. Here's the Narrowsburg depot gone in one day. They just brought bulldozers in. Also, same thing went all within a week. Hankins deposit and got torn down. Hancock got people nervous in Calhoun. They actually, asked Conrail about what if they're going to tear it down, and they weren't. In fact, even in here in this article, it said some years ago, the town residents painted the station themselves and put up flower boxes because they had a proprietary feeling about the depot, which is actually extended to today. This is when I was 14. I took my very first picture of the Calhoun Depot back in 1981 when I visited here. And you can see the flower boxes still on the windows there. In 1999, Conrail went away. It went to CSX, who I worked for, and half went to the Norfolk Southern. So the Norfolk Southern took this line over from Conrail. And here's a couple of pictures of, Norfolk Southern train. This is right at my camp, 2 miles west of Calhoun. This is my daughter and son, and I'm going to mention my son a little bit because he is now a locomotive engineer for Norfolk Southern. In 2000, this line is still owned by Norfolk Southern, but in 2005, they leased it to the New York Susquehanna Western Railroad. I did work for them when I first started back in 1987, and they have lines down in New Jersey, and they have some lines up in New York, and this is a line that they had trackage rates on, so they keep it up to move their traffic between their two routes there, and they are the ones responsible for it. So that kind of brings us up to today. The caboose here showing in Calhoun is usually the end, but not quite, because there's a little more to come, and that's because we got a new beginning for a very historic gem in our valley here, and we're going to try to get that as a visitor center. So brought you from 1832 to today, and that's where we're at. So.
I have two things I'd like to say.
Yeah.
Back in the 60s, I think it was around 69, they had a steam engine come through. It's just as
Yeah.
and it stopped right by the Olympia.
Oh, yeah.
They put water in it right there from that old wooden tower. The town was filled. You could move from the town.
Yeah.
People that came out to see them.
Yeah, I've seen some pictures of that.
And then my class, high school class in 1958, was the last class from that school to go on our senior trip to Washington DC from California right to Washington DC. Stopped over and then came back down from my age. It was quite an experience to have lived a lot of the things you can share. Thank you.
You said that the Harper's little magazine was 50 cents.
Yeah. That's
What year was that?
1851.
That's a significant amount of money.
Yeah.
I came to California in '66 to go to school here. And in the promotional stuff for St. Joseph's, they still showed seminarians coming off the train.
Yeah.
As if that's how you could get there. I mean, it wasn't possible in '66.
Yeah, I didn't point it out, but in some of these views, the Calhoun Depot sign actually had a second sign on top of it for a while that said the home of the seminary.
Oh, really?
And so, and they did that in certain towns, like for colleges, like at Alfred, it's that state university above the Alfred sign. So not only, if you could look up at the sign, say, hey, that's my stop to get off of, but there was, something else there. So it did have a little extra seminary sign for a
Yeah. Did Fred ever stand up? I wasn't sure.
If, when you guys get a break, on my memorabilia, you can look through later.
Go ahead, Fred.
I have a original deed from 1838. My place is 3 miles above Lordville on the river. My great grandpa also had a cell and spur. It's called Kilgore Spur on the U.S. geological maps.
Yeah, he
I
referenced
have
to the
pictures. I remember
Yeah.
being on one of the last passenger trains coming from Hoboken up to Hancock to see my grandparents. It's a lot of history. I have a lot of history down here. If they didn't use it, it went back to the landowners of deeds. And apparently there's a limb around there like that. And that was one of the reasons Erie, New York Regional Interconnect, was hesitant in the road as a right-of-way because of all those conditional deeds that the Erie had to set up when they first opened to get the land.
Yeah. Well, anybody
Did y'all
else?
hear me?
Yes, we did. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. Well, thank you, Randall, for their presentation.
Yes.
It was very informative and. Yes. We have a little. Back to give you here from the Delaware Council, one of our friends.
Oh, thank you.
Add to your vast collection. I don't know where that'll fit in, but railroad is right by here.